Hello, everyone, and welcome to Handmade Hero. Today, I kind of wanted to do some stuff. We split up the weekends last weekend and this weekend. Last weekend, we did a bunch of cleanup stuff on just tools. Like we updated to the new forecoder and fixed any of the stuff that we had a problem with there. And then we also kind of reworked the timer app to be more in line with what we need, so it stays up and stuff and doesn't only, if we go long, it doesn't remove this little square around my head and all that stuff. We just did like long running stuff that we just been putting up with. Is now in theory fixed. Also, we added topics. People wanted topics, so the topics exist now. You can see what the topic is for the day. And we can edit it and stuff. So it's a little better. It just some quality of life stuff. So hopefully that's good. What I wanted to do today was just take a look at what we're doing engine development wise, and take a look at. I want to go through and say what worked, what didn't, so that we kind of have just like, okay, here's the stuff we're gonna cut, and here's the stuff we're gonna leave for calling the engine done. Because there's like a bunch of stuff that we did that like didn't work out very well, and there's a bunch of stuff that we did that did, and it would be nice to just go in and like solidify things so that we don't still have stuff hanging around that was just like a waste of time or came out poorly. We should regress to something simpler or just delete it entirely if it turns out to be not something we actually want. And so I kind of wanted to make just a list of those things, so that we could have some, idea of like a checklist that we go through. It's a little bit hard because obviously streams are difficult. It's hard to kind of concentrate on things when you do them in such sort of chunked, like, you do a little bit here, a little bit there. It's difficult to really like, it's difficult to make sure that you have like a sensible idea of like what you're doing at any given time. It's much harder than it is when you're working on stuff for all day, every day, because it stays fresh in your brain, right? But basically, all I wanted to do was just kind of go through here and see what we actually have in terms of stuff in Handmade Hero and what stuff kind of went well and what didn't go well. And then maybe just put in terms of, maybe we can put right above our programmer stages of mental development here. We can put like our to-do list. We had sort of one of these, I think, at some point, but I don't actually remember. So it looks like we had like a separate file. That's fine. We can keep it in a separate file, right? So a lot of these things, I guess I don't know what this to-do list was for. We made it at some point, but a lot of these things we actually already did. So that's kind of less good potentially. In fact, I don't really know how much value this would be in general, so I think I might go with my original plan. Maybe we'll, that's just old stuff. Maybe I'll put it up here, because I find that anytime, usually what I do when I'm working normally is I use a notebook for this process. I don't actually even keep it in files anywhere. I find for some reason having a notebook next to me is like way better. And actually also everyone I know does it that way. Jeff Roberts does it that way. John Blow does it that way. Like, it just seems like the way that you keep to-do lists for some reason, not on a computer. I don't know why that is. Maybe because computers are very bad at everything all the time. But I think what we might do is just delete this guy. Just get rid of it, because I don't really want it there, and it's just old stuff anyway. So it's more trouble than it's worth, right? So deleting that and putting a to-do list here, again, not great, because I prefer to have like a list next to me, but in this case I won't really be able to. What I wanted to say first of all was like, debug system sucks. Like, the debug system has always sucked pretty much. And I think the reason that the debug system sucks, if you look at it, was just because we tried a bunch of things that were probably just too much for what we actually need, and they just end up creating a lot of cruft and unreliability. So to give some, I said it's hard to keep track of everything, and so it's odd that I'm probably able to come here and talk about what I think didn't work when I haven't touched this code in forever. But so, maybe take it with a grain of salt, because it should have probably faded from my memory quite a bit by now. But I can remember the broad strokes, and in general, what we did here is we said, look, we're just going to create logs. And the logs are going to be any thread can just write something to the log. And then they kind of get gathered up afterwards and displayed as data. Now, there's a lot of problems with the things that we chose to do here. And, you know, part of these are mistakes that I think I make often, meaning you keep making the mistake, and it's hard sometimes to not make the mistake. I make it less now, probably, than I did when we were doing this on Handmade Hero, but I still make it. It's one of the hardest mistakes not to make. And the reason for this particular mistake is when you think that you're going to do something to make it easy to do it somewhere, and the way that you make it easy to do it is making the code on the other side massively more complicated to the point where it actually is still pretty hard to use. And so one of the things we did here, like if you look at the debug interface, there's all this garbage. There's all these macros for like timing blocks and writing out things like event data and all this stuff. And all of these are really just, they're really just working around the fact that C and C++ are garbage about how you actually do metaprogramming. You know, really all you want here is like a set of enums, like one enum per event type you wanted to record, and then your code that's actually recording events just says, here's the, you know, event, this is the one it is. And so trying to automatically generate these things, we use all sorts of tricks. You can actually see just how ridiculous it gets up here. There's like an atomic add for the index. There's this like global table that gets updated. It then uses like a marker that it puts in that's like a underscore counter in here as well, let me show you what I mean. It's like somewhere in here. I don't remember. There it is. It uses like file and line and counter to create a unique thing on a line. Again, all of this stuff is just because C and C++ just suck at this. Like they should have solved this problem long ago. It should have been trivial to do stuff like just put things in that say, hey, this thing in the code gets a unique ID, and that unique ID should be stable across builds. That should be a thing you do day one if you're making a language. Instead, it's a thing that people never do. And basically every language ships without it somehow, even though it's like one of the most basic things you would want to do in computing. So as a result, it's all just us working around that. And the result is all of this workaround just makes the debug system a tremendous pain in the butt to use. If instead we had just said, look, just make the frickin' enum. Anytime you want to add something to this code base, just make the enum, man. It's not that hard, right? You know, adding one line to a file that's like, here's this new enum for this thing event that I want to track or whatever, would have saved so much time and so much aggravation. And as a result, it's exactly the same, and it's going to probably be more usable because you don't have all of this cruft that makes it very confusing and requires things to be done after the fact and all this other stuff. The other thing that's ridiculous about this, and this is just probably because I feel like, I'm still not, I wouldn't consider myself at the point yet where I'm really great at multi-threaded programming. I think probably nobody these days is really great at multi-threaded programming. I'm way better than I was, though, and just looking at this code, thinking about how it was done, it does things that I would never do today. So if you look at how this code works, for example, it does an atomic add on the debug table so that anyone who issues a debug event will go ahead and get a unique slot in the table. Now, the thing that's so terrible about this is that you really don't want to be doing atomic operations in your debug system. If you are, what you're doing is you're introducing new synchronized bus traffic for debug code, which is terrible, right? Like, you never want to do that, because anytime you do any kind of atomic operation at the CPU level, the CPU itself has to rely on the cache logic to actually synchronize. So you don't know, I mean, you might not be, but you might. You don't know what kind of additional thread synchronization you're actually secretly introducing there. Lock-free isn't lock-free is the good way to think about it, right? Anytime you use an atomic exchange, atomic compare exchange, atomic add, atomic increment, atomic decrement, any of these things, unless you've actually gone and looked at it, you don't know how much additional synchronization you might be causing between threads that are trying to access this same number, right? So this is one of those, like, this is just one of those things that once you get better at multi-threaded programming, you just avoid any kind of atomic adds or anything like that, except in the circumstances where you actually really wanted thread synchronization to occur. You try to eliminate. So you definitely don't want it in a debug system, because the debug system is, as much as possible, trying to be something that isn't going to radically change the behavior of the program that you're debugging. So we definitely don't want a situation where we're trying to debug something and we insert a debug event into it and all of a sudden our threads sync at a different point, right? So you know what I'm saying to you? Right. So it's just like one of those things you just don't want to do. Only one thread. The way to think about an atomic add, right, is that a thread that hits the atomic add, the CPU has to then lock that cache line as exclusive. Right? It has to acquire an exclusive access to that cache line so that it can perform the add and know that no one else has changed the cache line at the same time. If two threads hit the atomic add at the same time, they're both going to need to lock the cache line as exclusive to make that change, and the one that gets it first will stall the one that gets it second, right? Now, sometimes it doesn't matter, and this is why I say you can just time it if you really care, right? Because what's going to happen is out-of-order CPUs can work around this fact. So if this thing about recording the event can all be pushed onto a separate dependency chain where the CPU is just like leaving it in the table and going ahead, right? It's not going to be that bad potentially, because it may not really affect anything. Yes, you're stalled, but you're stalling one dependency chain and your CPU can go execute other ones. But again, you're counting on that behavior if you use this. You're counting on the fact that the out-of-order window will be big enough and there will be enough other dependency chains, blah, 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 right? You're counting on all of that to occur, and like, I just don't like to count on that, because unless I've actually profiled it, I don't know, right? It might be fine, it might not be. So typically what you want to do here, if you can, is just use thread local storage or something, and have things recorded per thread, and then later on at a time when you're used to synchronizing your threads, then you do one thing where you add them up at that ending. That's usually a better way to go. Now, you can also just decide not to do that if you don't mind this kind of pile on. But it's just worth understanding, like, that you've got these trade-offs to make. And so I probably wouldn't want to do that either. I'd probably want to pull that out, make everyone record their own thread local thing, and then when we wish to display the debug system, only if the debug system is actually displaying something at that time do we bother to actually merge those things together. So the normal run of the program doesn't get affected because nobody's atomically adding anything, right? So, there's things like that we can do, and I think that would be a good one. So I would write these down in here, like remove the atomic add debug table in favor of thread local is one thing we would like to do. Simplify everything dealing with events down to just a simple enum table of things that you pre-register in the enum, right? So all of that stuff, I think, would be a much better and more usable system, because it would allow us to record things more specifically and more predictably than we were doing before. And we just don't use a lot of this stuff, right? We just don't use a lot of this stuff to any great effect because it was so hard to deal with, right? And we had, in the editor side of things, this in-game editor thing here, which actually has us creating some, you can see here, like, we've got begin row, end row, and some button code, right? I think this is probably what we more want to go with. You can see it's very reasonable. It's easy to read. Again, the dev ID from pointer kind of stuff, like, we can probably simplify this stuff down quite a bit by actually just using an enum or something. But otherwise, if we just simplify this, and this is the debug system, so that you can write to it from anywhere, right? And then you can come back here and you can just we can write little displays for our debug system that use logic to display the things we want, right? So I would say, like, transfer debug view to the editor, and we would probably clean up editor UI stuff a bit. So I think that's I don't think there's that much of substance there to fix the debug system. It's just a lot of cruft. So it'll be like a bunch of, removing that cruft basically and being more diligent about keeping it simple and not overcomplicating something that we don't really need that much of, right? We don't need it to do these things because just a little bit of code that's explicit will do whatever it is that we needed it to do. And that's usually just a better way to do it than that sort of, it's going to do everything automatically and let us view things dynamically. It's like, no, it's not, because whatever you needed to do to create that view, you should have just created that view in code. It will be simpler, faster, and more powerful. Then you're never going to write like a whole UI for like constructing like debug views and stuff, right? That's just a huge waste of time. So you end up in this situation where you just have the worst of both worlds. So trying to avoid that kind of pit that I think the debug system fell into would be good. So there's two other things I can think of, and so the other big one I think that's most obvious is just lighting. Looking at lighting, I think there's a couple things. So I do like the lighting. Like, it's not actually that I don't like the lighting, and what it kind of ended up doing was very interesting, and I'm not unhappy about it. I should probably turn off some of this collision detection stuff that we were working on. Let me do that really quickly so that we can take a look at the lighting more specifically in move entity. So I'm just going to go ahead and stub move entity temporarily, which will get rid of most of this stuff. What? Unreachable really? Thank you so much for that piece of information. Great. Int don't care about that. Equals 1. Is that better? Are you happy now, compiler? So anyway, when we look at this, what the lighting looks like right now, I'm actually kind of happy with it, and I do think that it's kind of nice. It does a lot of interesting things, and it provides some kind of soft lighting, and the bounce lighting is nice and stuff. But I just think, like, in terms of the complexity of the code and the quality, it's just not there. And yes, like, an easy way for us to, I should probably also, I guess while I'm at it, turn off the in the entity renderer, the collision volumes being drawn there is not particularly relevant either. But anyway, point being, the lighting system is okay, but I just think bang for the buck wise, it's just not there, right? And we could, one of the reasons for that is we're doing it CPU side. And this is really a GPU side thing. We could move it to the GPU, and that would certainly be something we could do. But we had pretty nice lighting working before when I tried just doing circular lights in there, and they're not like very physically correct, but I think they looked better, and they were very cheap to do. And so I think what I might want to do is just regress one on the lighting and use what is basically just like artistic lighting. So maybe, I don't know exactly how to solve the light leakage problem with that kind of lighting. Like, one of the things that we get right now, right, because it's actually doing some raycasting, is like the outside is dark and the inside is light if the light can't reach the outside, right? And that's something that presumably you would want. And so we may have to do a little bit of hackage to get it to not do grotesque things, like propagate like a light too far outside of a wall like that. And so, but I'm okay doing some of that hackage. I just think the circular lights looked really good, and I think we could do most of what we want to do with them, and it would just be way less performance cost and better quality level, and just not as realistic. But that's okay, right? So I think what I'd like to do is try regressing to circular lights and just simplify the lighting system down to that, because I think that it looked cool and it was an interesting technique, and it would keep things simple, right? So regress to circular light source based lighting. So I'd like to just kind of regress to that and say, look, we're going to force it to be artistic lighting, and we're going to see what we can do there. And the only question I have is like, maybe like some simple way of walls preventing light leakage, right? And again, not having really done a system like this before, like a circular light system, because I haven't really done a system like that before, I don't really know what the hack should be. Like, I don't know what hack should do it. But I think it shouldn't be impossible, right? Like, after trying a few hacks, in theory, we should be able to get something that works okay. So that's all I would really like to do with lighting, and I think we can do that pretty simply. I also think we can get some good quality by doing a couple basic things in there. Again, by just having a couple different kinds of artistic style light that we can place, and that directly write their values out into the system should be okay. And then if we just have like occluders just take light out of the system, that might just be good enough. So we'll see. But we'll play around with it maybe for a week or two, and just like whatever we can get out of the circular lighting system, that's what we go with, because that way it's nice and fast. And I know this one kind of seems fast, but you can see that it's not really very good quality. In order to get the quality up higher and to not have this be much lag, it would be a lot of work, or move to the GPU. And we still don't really have a good story for flicker, right? So we could do it, but it's just going to cost a lot, right? It's going to cost a lot of effort and probably also GPU time moving it there. And I just don't know that makes sense for this game, right? It just seems like a bad decision, so I think maybe we get rid of it and move to the circular lights. It's a shame because it does look cool, for sure. But I'm just thinking maybe we can make it look equally cool. I don't know. As I'm saying all these words and I'm down here like playing in the dungeon and looking how cool the light sources are, I'm kind of having second thoughts about that. But like I said, I'm not really sure how we move forward from where we are right now that effectively. I don't know. Maybe I'm being stupid. That does look really cool though, doesn't it? You get sort of these bad square effects as light fall off happens. Maybe we can fix those. I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't be so quick to dismiss this. It really looks incredibly cool. This is why it's so difficult. I don't know. That really does look pretty darn cool, to be completely honest. And, this is on a 5-year-old machine, so, it only gets faster with a modern machine. Run this on a Threadripper and the lighting would be quite good. I don't know. Gosh, yeah. For some reason, I remembered the lighting looking a lot worse than this. So that's part of it. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what to make of that. That's a much harder decision than I thought it was going to be. I thought the lighting looked worse than this. Like, really, mostly what I'm seeing is like the objectionable kind of square artifact here and a little bit of flickering, which is really not that bad by comparison to where I thought we were at lighting-wise. So that definitely makes it a more difficult decision. Yuck. Well, I don't know. Maybe the answer is we actually leave it in here and just try to do the square fall off. Try to fix that look. I mean, the reason that the square fall off happens is because we're sampling at there's light probes basically, right? Like placed throughout the system, placed throughout the world, and those light probes, they interpolate sort of along the square. And when you get outside of where a light is likely to be hitting ever, you get square fall off because you don't have like negative light contribution. It might be possible to eliminate that fall off. Gosh, because one of the things that happens in that kind of a system is that because lighting is only strictly positive, what you get is when you drop below, when you drop down to 0, it doesn't know how to interpolate. This is a common problem with linear interpolation when you just have sample points that are clamped. They have to be 0 or above. This is what you get. I guess I'm wondering now, like if we look at the lighting and we go in here and if we look at the shader, I guess is probably where we would look at it. If we look at the shader for this, where we're talking about how we're going to sample the lighting, I'm curious to know in here what we do at the moment, because we haven't looked at these particularly much. Like you can see the shader code in here. I should probably, let's add to our to-do list, pull the shaders out into their own files. Unless, I guess I have 4Coder people on the stream here. Is there any chance of 4Coder? Probably not. So is there any chance of getting 4Coder to just continue to do code formatting inside a string? Because like what I actually want is the ability to just do the code directly in here, right? But this is not usable, right? I want it to just indent it like it indents C code, as if it was starting like a new C program, right? I'm sure that's probably not possible at all. But that is what I would want. You know what I mean? So that you can keep your shaders in the same file as your rendering code is just kind of nice. So you don't have to have these extra files for no reason. So, there's that. But what I was going to say is, anyway, separate from all this, maybe move them to their own files unless 4Coder gets, strings indent as code as a thing. But yeah, I don't think it's possible either. So, if somehow you could just tell 4Coder to ignore this, right? Like somehow tell it that this sort of thing isn't, like, add a token to 4Coder that we know what it is. It's like that, right? And then whenever we do that, just don't pretend it's an open bracket. Just treat that as an open, like just add that as this as open bracket and this as close bracket as tokens. I think it would just work, right? It's just something to think about, right? Because that would be kind of cool if you could do that. Anyway, and I think it's literally just changing the tokenizer to recognize one extra thing as bracket, right? Like, I don't think the rest of 4Coder stays the same. It just thinks, oh, he opened a bracket here, right? Like, right? I think. Anyway, doesn't matter, but I think it's probably easier than you think it is I guess the only thing I was going to point out there. All right, so anyway, when we're sampling the lighting, what I was trying to say is that somewhere in this disgusting mess of code that we haven't really looked at and don't really care much about, but when we do the sample lighting, right, we do these textile fetches and we compute lighting in this. We have these octahedral light maps. It's crazy complicated for someone who's not a graphics programmer, which is me. It's ridiculous that we do all this stuff, but that's just what happens on stream. We're like, let's try this, and we tried it, and this is what we got. What I was going to say is when we do these sums of the light sources here, you can see it doing like a bunch of sample lightings, and then it basically like linearly interpolates between them. What happens is if you have a particular light source, like the light source that is shining on the character, obviously when it no longer sees any contribution from that light source, then and so just to bring it back to what's actually happening on here, when you look at what's happening in the area right around the player, the reason that you're getting that square fall off is because and it's worth pointing out for people who've never thought about this before, because it's kind of tricky and it's not intuitive. If you look at what happens, you'll notice why isn't it square in here? Right? Like, why does it look radial right up until the point where the light stops? Right? Why does it look radial up till there? And the reason for that is because as long as linear interpolation has something to interpolate, it will look radial. Linear interpolation actually reconstructs radial things just fine. The problem is when you get to the point where the light source has no contribution. So this vertex, and it's not a literal vertex, I'm just talking about this point of the lighting that's interpolating, has no contribution from this light source, basically. So its contribution is 0. When these have to interpolate to 0, what happens is the radial nature is no longer preserved because it should have been less than 0 here, technically, right? And since it should have been less than 0, it doesn't have any way to interpolate to that because it doesn't know how far below 0 it should be. It just sees 0. So it's basically like clipping off the radial fall off, and that's what makes things appear as a square. So there's ways we can try to work around this, certainly. Like one of them is you just reduce the lighting contribution so that actually your fall off continues below 0, if that makes sense. You can see us doing a little bit of that here. So this light floor value was designed to do that, right? So, for example, if I rebuild like this with the light floor value of 0.2, which basically like it brings it down. And again, I don't know if this still works properly here. We'll see in a second. But you can see that now everything kind of is that. It has a lot less of that effect to it, right? But it doesn't prevent this, right? Because this is still above that level. And, obviously we don't want to do this because we end up with no data out here because we clamp the light level down. So previously that is how we were doing it when we only had the one circle light source. You can see when it falls off to 0, it works properly. So the question is just, well, okay, could we just do that per light source? So when we're actually summing in our light sources, can we make it so that they go down below 0 in some other way, right? And, the reason I didn't do that at the time is because I can't really think of it offhand exactly how it would work, meaning, I can't just take each individual light source and have those light sources actually go below 0. Because if those light sources actually went below 0, then I would end up subtracting light as you got towards the floor of them, right? Now, maybe there's some way to make the fall off just always continue into the negative space. Yeah, I'm not seeing how you take more than one light source and you combine them in such a way and still use that fall off trick, right? Like I just don't quite see it. And maybe what we should do is spend some time here thinking about that, but that's what happens. And that's why, like I said, if you look at this stuff and it looks all very square, and then we change the light floor value here to be 2 instead. When we make a change like that, you can then see what happens in here. You can see how you get this nice perfect circle at the 0 point, right? At the 0 point. And so the question is just, can we do that somehow with the summation? And I just don't see it. I probably should, but I don't. And so what we know we can do is we can ensure nice radial smooth edges as we go to 0, but we can't, I don't think, for other things. And maybe that's because, I don't know. Maybe if you do it per sample is not going to help you. Like I said, I don't think this part, I don't think you could just do it here because it's at the summation time that it would matter. So, I'm just not sure. When we have the code that actually writes the lighting in, so when it adds the samples, you know, those samples aren't going to pick up, you know, because it's raycasting, right? So those samples just aren't going to pick up. They're not going to pick up that information. It could be, you know, let's try a couple things first. I don't want to give up quite yet. So yeah, I assume that, you know, if you're all of these are linear combinations, so in theory, it shouldn't matter where we do this, right? Like if we do it up here, it wouldn't matter, because in theory we should be able to subtract it at the end, subtracting it to all the values we blend versus just taking it out as a constant factor shouldn't make a difference, right? So yeah, I mean, maybe one answer is if you somehow blur the edges of things so that they smooth themselves out more. But I don't know. But yeah, looking at it, you know, it's something to think about. I don't know. Like I said, I really don't. I don't have an opinion about it, other than if I look at the lighting right now, the primary thing that I think needs to get fixed is the fact that the individual lights have that kind of square fall off to them, and I don't see the cheap fix, right? There might well be one, and I just don't know what it is. You know what I mean? So that's again why I say, like, you know, I just don't know. I agree, maybe leaving the lighting in is a good idea. It looks actually quite nice. So, you know, I don't know what to make of that. But I guess, like, you'd have to just live with the kind of ugly square fall off lighting or come up with a clever solution, and I don't have one, right? So I don't really have much else to say about that. We also have the problem of kind of the lagginess of it, right? So if we take a look at how slow the lighting is in terms of like the I guess the bring up rate, because, you know, it computes the lighting using kind of, it can't really do that many samples per frame. It's on the CPU. You can kind of see here we've got a ratio that's just like how much updating you want to do. And so, like, if we allowed it to update sort of much more rapidly, you would see the flicker is way more pronounced, right? So, like, that's what happens if we update, you know, if we update the lighting at a fast rate. So it's really closely pegged. So the way we're getting around that fact, right? The way we're getting around the fact that we have a lot of flicker is just by tuning this value, right, to something that's not that bad. So here's sampling it at half that rate, right? And you can see now you have, you know, a lot less flicker, but still pretty noticeable. Let me, make that full screen. A lot less flicker, but still pretty noticeable. And then if you, you know, drop it down maybe a little bit further, you get less flicker still. That's probably good enough, right? Like in terms of amount of flicker. So, you know, you could hover somewhere around there. And again, you can also increase it. You can increase the number of rays you cast on a more powerful machine, certainly, which currently we're not really doing. So, you know, we could go in here and you can make it slower and just more, you know, more rays. I don't really remember what we use for that control. To be completely honest with you, I don't actually remember. The number of rays cast is like, yeah, I don't remember how many. Somewhere in here we set this number, right? And you can see here it, you know, generates this work count, which is, you know, just a number we create. It looks like we break them into like rows, right? So, yeah, I don't know. I don't even remember where we set that number. You can see building the space partition, doing the grid walks. Here's us looping over the voxels. So full cast presumably could say how many it wanted. It looks like it just always does one, right? Here's grid raycast. Oh, no, it's 8. I take it back. Although that's probably just 8 because that is the number it adds per row, right? Yeah. So that's probably not. It's not 8 rays. It's it's 8 rays because it's an octahedron, right? So it does one cast out of each face of the octahedral sampling that it's doing. That's all that is, right? You can see this it looking up the sample direction. So you know, I think that's all that actually does, right? So, you know, like I said, it's very complicated code. There's just a lot happening in here, and I'm just not sure that the payoff actually is worth it. I think we can do, you know, if I wanted to spend a year of my actual full-time making the best possible lighting thing, you definitely can. Like, this is not the best we can do by far, but just in terms of, you know, cost-benefit analysis, I'm just not sure it's there. Let me look. Why can I not search for full cast? There we go. So, like, I don't know. Can we, for example, just do this twice and double the number of rays cast? It looks like the answer is yes. Although, actually, that might not sum, because full cast, I think, doesn't actually, yeah, so that's actually not quite right, because I think it just does a cold write, not an add. So I think full cast twice actually isn't useful. Grid raycast, I think just writes directly. I think. So yeah, like this code would have to be modified slightly because it needs to call it with a different like set of directions, right? Because otherwise they'll sample the same direction twice. And, you know, it would have to do it, yeah, it would have to like sum the values, which I don't think it currently does. Or maybe it does. Load, yeah, no, it does. It does a load, and then it does an add, right? It does the blend, right? So it actually does. So grid raycast doing the blend, it should work if you do it twice, I think. The only question is how do we actually get a separate set of sample directions out of it, right? Because, you know, we load both of these here, right? So you would want to do this basically twice, where entropy index gets updated. And, you know, we probably really should, because if you look at how long it takes to do that, it looks like it's not really the majority of the cost. So probably would want to actually do this, where we would sample the lighting twice, right? So yeah, I might suggest that we actually do that. I'd be curious to know if we were at 4 frames of lag, which is not that bad. I would be interested to know how limited the flicker could be by just increasing the sampling, because I think it might be good, actually. That might actually be fine. And just don't update the diffuse map each time. So, I don't know. This is a really tough call. I'm sorry, I just don't have the answer. I don't know. That's a really tough question. That's just a really tough question. So if we put in like full 1 second of lag, you can see what the lighting looks like probably as best it would, right? This is like the nice, super smooth version of the lighting. And I think we could get there just by casting a few more arrays, because actually I think we're pretty good. So again, honestly, I'm kind of worried now because I'm like, I guess I don't want to rip out the lighting. It's quite nice. Maybe it just stays the way it is. The only thing I'd like to know is there some way to get less of that squariness? You know? Because I think we could basically have it be roughly this quality by just casting like 4 times more rays per second, which I think we could easily get, is not that hard. And then it would look like this, which is basically perfect. So I don't know. I think we just cast a few more rays and call it a day. And then, yeah, the square fall off is really the bummer. Anyone? Does anyone have any clever ideas about the square fall off? Yeah, the other light sources are probably less bright, so you notice them less. I mean, it could also just be the height. I mean, that light in particular that's floating above the hero, you know, technically that light really shouldn't be there because the hero is not really lit, although maybe the glove would be. So that's kind of hard to say. But I think that's the debug light actually is technically what that is. I don't think that's actually supposed to be yeah, that's just the entity, you know, that's just not the entity. So I think it could be that maybe just it's the height off the ground is part of why it looks squarier, because it's kind of more in that position. I don't know, though. That's a good question. And let me try moving it up more. I think it's the debug light. Don't quote me on that. Yeah, I think it's the debug light. So yeah, if you know, if it's not so low to the ground, right, or if it's not so bright, it's not as much of a problem, right? So maybe it's okay. I mean, you can still see the squariness, right? Like you can see it on the other lights too. It's always there, and it's just the artifact of the fact that the interpolation is is on a square grid. And so you get that artifact as a light ceases to contribute, you get that sort of vague fall off, right? So I don't know, like maybe we just leave it this way. Maybe this is just what the lighting looks like. I don't know. Because I do think this is fine. And then we just need to cast more rays because it's now there's too much lag on filling in the lighting, right? And so that's obviously something that you want to fix. But I do think, like, because you can see how long it takes to like actually like light up the region, right? But I think we could fix that by just casting a few more rays, which I don't think is that expensive in the system. So I think maybe we'll just do that, and that'll just be the lighting. So maybe get it up, like maybe cast 4 times as many rays. That's a lot of rays additional to cast, but I think we could do it because again, a lot of the time right now is actually not spent in the ray cast. It's actually spent in the it's spent in like the converting from specular to diffuse, right? So maybe not. So I guess maybe we'll just do that. And I'll leave the lighting the way it is. Maybe. I mean, we could. Looking at other things that I'd like to fix. So one question I have, and I don't know. So this is kind of a broad question, and I'm not sure what the answer is. So it's kind of pretty tricky to think through. I don't know. One question I have is how much are we actually getting out of the 3D-ness of the levels? Meaning, you know, there's a lot of stuff in there that would get faster if everything was always 2D, right? Meaning you couldn't have things like these stairs where people exist in between. Because, for example, the collision detection currently has to run in 3D. It could switch to 2D. We wouldn't need to have the lighting would get faster because it would only be one flat plate instead of actually a 3-dimensional thing that has to extend downward to lower surfaces, right? So, you know, it's hard to say, but there's definite cost in having that dimensionality, right? So I do think that's a tough call. I don't know what the best call is there, but you know, we could just say that it's just there's only one plane of existence, right? And you know, the way that the main difference, the thing we would see differently, is pretty much the only thing we would see differently, right? Is this wouldn't happen, right? We wouldn't do that. So there would just be a thing like a square you hop on and then you suddenly are down here. And, you know, when I think about it, first of all, I really like this. It's kind of cool to be able to hop down. But when I think about the cost, you know what I mean? The cost just seems way too high for just that, right? And so I think maybe a better thing here would be regress to just a 2D plane for, you know what I'm saying? And so everything stays the same. Like it all looks exactly the same, but you just can't do that. You know what I mean? It also gets us out of the business of trying to tune that alpha fade, which is a thing we have to manage, right? Because now you're always drawing everything. There's no alpha fade there. It's just, it is what it is, you know? So that seems kind of compelling. It just simplifies the code a lot. And then again, yeah, you get faster lighting as well because you just have a ton less probes because you only have one flat plate. So I think maybe we'll put that on the list because it's not that I don't think you could do cool things there. You obviously can. It's just that the amount of work it would take to do the cool things there, we would save. We don't have to do it, and we also get a bunch of free performance back in things like the collision detector and the lighting because now we only have one plane to think about. And it just seems like that's a win, right? So like I would say remove Z from world construction, like optimized lighting, optimized collision detection that we get for that, right? Because things just can't be vertical now. I think that would be good, and I think that's kind of an obvious choice for this game because we wouldn't be making much use of it. There's just occasional things that you'd see down to below you or something. It's just like, yeah, they're cool, but they're not enough cool for what we pay, right? It's just not a good cost-benefit analysis, I think. Okay. So I guess I would say Space naming, just trying to stretch the hammer. Yeah, I know. The more stuff I have to do, the longer we keep this show on. So yeah, there's the natural kind of thing there. But at some point, I would like to stop. Right? I can't just keep making engines on this stream forever. I know people would prefer that because they just like the show, and I appreciate that you like the show. I'm glad. It's rare that 500 people show up every week for anything. So, I appreciate it, but at some point, it's just like, I want to move on to something else. So, But anyway, so I do think that would be good. I also think, like, simplified arenas. So right now, we are doing arenas in a kind of a way that's not that useful. So just like base pointers and grow basically is what I think we should switch to, because we don't really need anything else for the stuff we do. So I think that would actually be fine. So I think this is most of the stuff. I guess one thing I don't know is, like, I'd probably like to take a quick look over at the asset builds. I think they're still too complicated. We did simplify them a bit, but they're still, like, there's just too much, right? And I do think, it would be like, the asset stuff just still seems a bit too complicated, right? And I think so. Maybe part of that is just that when we are loading these files, when we do like the build, I don't remember exactly what that file was called. It's like there's a processor for the asset stuff. I think it's in import. In import, I feel like we've got a lot of stuff with, like, grid tags, and all this stuff. We import things and we extract them and then we tag them. I just wonder if maybe we can switch to a system that's, like, way less complicated than this. One where we basically just treat it as, like, a basic sprite sheet where we say, look, when you render something, you just say what the sprite sheet is and which cell of the sprite sheet, and that's it. Like, you don't actually have, like, tags that are actually, like, picked for anything. It's like we just define that stuff in code and off we go. I don't know if that makes a lot of sense or not. It could be that this is already simple enough, but I don't know. It still feels like it's a little too complicated. Like, when I look at those tag files, they just seem like it's too much for what we get again. So I look at over here at, like, the space game stuff, and it's like all these things are here, and, like, it's just too much, right? It just seems like it's too much stuff. And I don't think it should be necessary to have quite so much stuff in quite so much markup. You know what I mean? So, like, I just wonder if we can simplify the system down to something that's just completely automated, where basically the code just puts in the index and it just looks it up by that directly. And I don't know. I don't know how plausible that would be. The main problem that you get pretty much all the time is the fact that, like, there's no easy way to mark up things for sprites, right? Like, there's no easy way in, like, Photoshop for an artist to say, here's the, like, alignment point of the sprite for no particular reason. Like, they could create those, but it's kind of hard for them to do, because even if they put something in that lets you know what it is, it's hard for them to see it because they don't see it in the game, and so there's just all this kind of nastiness there. So I don't know. So maybe that's not that easy, but, like, right now, this is just a pain in the butt, right? Like, you have to go in here, and you have, like, the hero or something, like, hopping around, and you have to go into this thing, and you can, like, pick stuff. Like, I don't even remember how to do this. I don't know why it's picking those things. Is this broken somehow? Maybe we broke it. Like, that's not what those are. Oh, I was on the wrong thing. So apparently there's two things here. I don't know what this one is. All right, doesn't matter. Anyway, the point is, if we look at one of these things, right, it's got these alignment points on there. And we have to adjust those, like, right, to say, like, where roughly the head goes relative to other things. I don't know. Like, is that really the best way to do this? It just seems overcomplicated. Like, we needed this whole editor and stuff for it. And I just don't know. Like, I just don't know a better way to do it. The way that we do it at Molly for things that are more like professional, like, art process kinds of things, is we just do it all in Photoshop, right? And then we import the Photoshop layers and stuff like that. And I think that might be a bit much for this game. So I don't know like what the simpler solution is here, where we can just have that stuff come through any more easily than what we've got. I don't know. Maybe it is just as simple as it can be, but it would be nice. It would be nice if we could simplify that somewhat. So like, so maybe like the code just directly refers to grid squares in imports. So you say like, I'm doing this thing and this is the grid square I want. And then that way we just get rid of the whole tagging process, which simplifies that a little bit. I don't think there's any way to get rid of the hotspot stuff. So I think that just has to stay. So I don't know that there's much to do about that. It's possible that we just require the art to be aligned when it comes in. Because like we could just say, look, the way we're going to do it, we're going to change the way the art is, and the art just has to be aligned when it comes in, and we don't allow any adjustment, right? It just comes in stacked the way it's stacked. And I don't know, right? So I don't know. So that may be roughly it. Let me see what else. Is there anything else? I think we might be mostly done. I don't think there's many other things. The brain stuff may be a little too complicated. I don't know. We may want to take a look at that and just see, like, can we simplify the brain stuff down a little bit? The way it works right now is like brains gather up collections of entities that they operate on. And I don't know if that's like too complicated or not. Like, we could see like, and the way that it does that is that an entity is itself like, each of the entities kind of like forms the brain by a brain like gathers up a series of entities like all the parts of a snake or something, and then operates on them. And it seems pretty good, but I don't know, might be overcomplicated. But I don't know that there's a lot of other ways to deal with it, because entities. We could start we could start thinking of entities as having multiple components because they sort of already do, and so maybe we need to do this. Like, look at brains versus entities, versus what is it? Parts. Pieces. Like, can we just make entities plus pieces, and the pieces are what, and like the entire bounding box of the pieces is what we unpack, right? So basically, could we make it so that entities are just, they don't need to gather anything? Like, an entity is just a thing that has parts to it, and it can move its parts independently if it wishes to, but in general, like, that's considered one entity. Do we need the brain entity pieces? Can we just do entity plus pieces and call it a day? I guess that'd be the one other thing. I think that's it for the things that I wanted to think about in the engine that I think we should probably fix. I don't know that there's much more here to worry about. So let's talk about world gen. I think we can definitely simplify that. So I think world gen, we could just go with a much simpler layout scheme, like maybe just something that plops these dungeons down and then connects them, right? Would probably be a lot simpler than what we have right now, which is like doing this kind of weird like 2-pass thing. You know, there's a lot of cool stuff you could do there, but realistically speaking, you know, this is a game where you're supposed to go into rooms, battle the room, and then go to the next room. It's unclear that we get very much from this. You know, like I just don't know that there's much point to having something more complicated happening. So like simplify dramatically, like try to get down to single pass, or at least single pass after broad layout. So I think we could condense that down quite a bit, just untangling that code path. So I do think that was probably worth it as well. I think most of the other stuff is fine. I assume the cutscene stuff is still fine. I don't remember if there's anything here that we needed to do. I think it all still works pretty well. Maybe it doesn't. I don't know. We haven't really looked at it in a long time. But it looks like the cutscene stuff still works just fine. Yeah. I mean, this all seems like it's all working properly, right? And yeah, I do big picture revision from time to time. It's just usually it's not as bad as Handmade Hero because usually I'm doing it kind of continuously because it's kind of in my head all the time. So it's maybe not as bad these days, right? But like, you know, I definitely do it. Here's Santa Claus being a dick, as he always is. Yes, the idea is that this would have voiceover to it, and you know, I don't have voiceover yet for it, but eventually we would just have the voiceover. Maybe I could record some voiceover for it. As doing SGG informed decisions handmade. No, the other way around. Like I'm mostly trying to inform Starco Galaxy by Handmade Hero. That's not a goat monster, it's Krampus. Don't you know who Krampus is? Come on, man. Or Krampus, as I believe is more properly pronounced. Krampus comes right before Christmas, like the 14th or the 15th, not the 25th. He comes before Christmas for like the naughty children. And like he dismembers them and puts them in a bag, I think. Is what happens normally. So he like cuts off their limbs and he puts them in a bag and then they're never heard, they're just taken away. That's like actually what people I think that's what Krampus is supposedly actually does. That's what they tell children Krampus does, I think, in places where they celebrate Krampus. I don't know if it's German. It's definitely like Northern European or Northeastern European, that kind of area, I think. It might be German. But I think it's kind of more regional than that. It's not just German. It's like kind of in a lot of places. Um, all right. So yeah, I think that's what I would like to do. And so this is just going to be a simplification pass to get everything ready. And like I said, I probably want to blitz it. So what I probably will do, I don't know about this week, but like maybe next week, I might do like 8 hours a day of stream. Well, 8 hours a day is probably too much for my voice, but like, 4 hours a day of streams every day for a while. So so I think that's what we'll do. And like I said, I don't know exactly when I'll start that, but when I start that, I think I want to do it kind of concentrated, because I don't think you can do this kind of revision work piecemeal. You kind of have to just sit down and do it and keep it in your head properly, because if you don't, you're just going to screw it up, and that's not going to be particularly useful. So we'll probably do a fairly dense series of streams for that starting soon. But yeah, until then, yeah, that's the list. That's the list. All right, so thanks everyone for joining me. We will pick that up when we decide to actually start. As always, if you do want to follow along at home, of course, you can go to handmadehero.org. Pre-orders of the game come with the source code if you want to follow along with what I'm doing. You can try to do the engine rewrite yourself if you want to. Well, it's not really a rewrite. Cleanup, I guess, is what it is. Simplification. Yeah, that's about it for today. I'll be back here probably next Sunday, maybe to kick things off. Again, I don't know exactly what the schedule will be, but I probably be back here next Sunday to talk about what we're going to do and when we're going to do it, or maybe just to start doing it then, and we'll just continue through the week. We'll see. Until then, have fun programming, everyone, and I will see you on the internet. Take it easy, everybody.